Yeah.
That Wednesday. I got a nice trim. So yeah.
Yeah, I can see.
Perspectives, different views, one voice.
Welcome to the LDN Perspective. This is another episode. I am glad for everybody to join us here today. So I'm your host. My name is Mo, and I'm also joined here by my friends and co-hosts.
Hi, I'm Kojo.
Hi, I'm Cam.
Hi, I'm Ali.
So in this conversation, it is a very triggering, controversial title. It goes by a statement which is, Black people were not ready for freedom. That might mean a lot to most people, but these comments were made by a South African entrepreneur by the name of Vici Tembekwayo. And so just before we begin, we're going to play the video for you. So I'm going to hand it over to Kojo. I think you're going to share the screen just so we can quickly see the video, have some context, and then basically share what we all feel about this.
Some of you asked me on social media what happened to the hub and vendor. Guys, can I, before you go, I want to say something, and this is going to go on the record, so I know I'll be destroyed for this, but it's my truth, so it. Black people were not ready for freedom. We weren't. We were not ready for freedom. I've studied everywhere we have been liberated, whether or not we were able to liberate ourselves from our own bondage. And it's a deep question. So, study us as a people. This is not a criticism, it's a reflection. If you differ, I'm happy to share perspectives. But study us as a people. You notice that everywhere where we are in bondage, we are phenomenal at fighting for our liberation. Once we've received it, something goes wrong. And the mindset is pervasive. And it's pervasive, it's invasive, it's insidious. It's like a virus. And if you try and remove, once a virus takes over a cell, it multiplies. And so the reason you can't remove the virus is the only way to kill it is to kill the host. That's where we are. So when a person amongst us does something, rather than celebrate, we ridicule. Rather than collaborate, we compete. Rather than support, we sabotage. I thought long and hard about why is this? Like, it's been bugging me. And then I realized something, that whether it was apartheid, colonization, the Jim Crow laws in the US, all of those systems of oppression had one singularity in communication. They said to Black people, only one. That's it. So in slavery days, there was only one house nigger. The rest of y'all worked in the field. When we negotiated for our South Africa, there was only Mandela at Codesa. All the other political parties had to sit and watch the ANC. When we got our liberation, there was only one Cyril at the board. Only one. So when a Black person makes it, the rest of us go, shit, he's taken the seat. That's why we practice crabs in a bucket. We go, the only way I get that seat is if I'm Tatu Vusi Thembekwayo. We don't think multiplier. Make sense? So he's going, I want to make a supercar. Nobody's going, how do I make tires for a supercar? We all go, shit, now he's done it. I'm telling guys, this is my most honest reflection on, and I've thought about, do I make it do I share it on social media? I was just like, the time will come. This has felt right, is the time. People will see this and I'll get slated for it, I'm sure. But I'm telling you now, I see it with me. The only people who attack are the people who want the seat. But here's what you're not seeing. I'm sitting where I'm sitting, and where I'm sitting, the system I'm fighting, if I get it right, opens for all of us. So, you know, it's the guy who fights Makhosa. It's the guy who fights Tulasindi. It's the guy who fights a Trevor Noah. What you don't recognize is what they are doing in their spaces makes it okay for us to be in those spaces. So don't fight Batu, fight Nike. Don't fight Makhosa, fight Gucci. Do you get it? Like your mind, it's all wrong, guys. The mindset is this thing. Hey, man, we must be here, man. My uncle always says, "Ndonak, how name dula oblanga tanto? How name dula?" Okay, cool. So the point I'm making, and so I don't want to get into the details of what happened in Venda, but let me put it to you this way. We got sabotaged. We went in, we got the land. I invested over 8 million rand building our hub. We went in local suppliers. Everything in my hub was done by local people. The paving, the electrification, the fencing, everything. 8 million rand I pumped into the local economy of Toriando. Then you know what happened? Proper sabotage. The municipal manager, the mayor, the commissioner of police, the police station manager, even the judge at the High Court were all in on it. I've said this publicly, f him, let him sue me, I got the money. And I asked myself, why would they do it? Because it's very simple. In their minds, a young guy can't just come, J. No. He must respect first. And you're just like, I'm trying to change the world. You know, like our hub was going to be free, guys, free. State of the art, running 4G networks. We were offering 200 accredited courses with the University of Pretoria, 100 more by Gibbs, and 100 by the London School of Economics. Collectively, the courses alone are going to cost me 4 million. I was going to find young entrepreneurs in the area, educate them for free to walk out with a diploma or degree. Then I was going to give them a hub that runs for free. You can just come and use it. Network, Wi-Fi, anything you want, just come and use it. It's yours. Why? Because it just makes sense too. The old people didn't see it that way. I think a lot of us are going to have to make a decision about who we're going to give the future of this continent to. Because the people in charge now, the old ones, ain't got a clue what they're doing. They don't have a clue what they're doing. When you're going to pitch at that big business, I'm going to share some news for you down. I want to listen to this gentleman. When you're going to pitch for that opportunity at that big business, let me tell you, Fantonder is the one supporting you. Mantla Sbego at the board is one going, no. Now, I know I've said some stuff that have cut deep, but you know what it hurt? Well, know what they say, it only hurts if it's true. My brother, over to you.
Yeah, so interesting talk there. So just so we can make this quick and swift, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get our co-hosts to all just give their quick response as to what their thoughts are. I will end with mine, and then we'll open it out to the audience, and let's have a proper conversation about this and what everybody thinks. So yeah, guys, why don't you guys go first, and then I will close off with my thoughts as well.
I mean, I don't have a lot to say at this stage. It's an interesting video. He touches on some interesting points. I guess the most striking one is the very fact that he said black people weren't ready for freedom. That's a really very loaded sort of statement. If you unpack it, you have to add a bit of context, I guess. And I guess he did in terms of speaking about circumstances in which black people tried to prosper after gaining freedom in one way or another. Much of his experiences are from South Africa, so he can only really speak about that insofar as apartheid. But talking about black people not being ready for freedom, I think as I said, in my mind, it raises the question as to weren't we free before slavery? But in terms of being enslaved, we were indoctrinated with psychological torture and trauma, and that trauma filtered down from generation to generation. So there was a mindset set in place there. And even after, let's say you use an American example, people were released and given their freedom, they weren't given reparations. You know, they weren't even, they weren't given the key tools to utilize in order for them to create some form of prosperity. So I don't think I completely agree with his statement there. I think you'd have to definitely unpack it, and it probably is a statement that requires a bit more of a wider discussion.
Thanks for that, Cam. I think I'm a bit with you on some of the stuff that was said. I think initially seeing that video, obviously the statement in itself kind of like, there are certain emotions that kind of like gets you going for first of all looking at that statement. But I think for me personally, just listening to what he was saying and some of the examples he was using made me understand a bit more of what he was trying to say. And yes, you are right, Cam, going back to the idea of freedom, that Black people were free before all this. So I guess it was more around colonization. And I guess he went through a lot of the points, apartheid and the whole Jim Crow laws in America. And I guess what for me has to be done is maybe we need to decouple that kind of physical kind of freedom from the mental kind of challenges that people had, just based on some of the points that you mentioned regarding the indoctrination. And I think obviously once you decouple that, what you have to understand, if someone is in captivity, maybe the only thing they'll think about is just getting out of that bondage. And after getting out of that bondage, then they might think about how they need to ensure they never get into that bondage again. And I think obviously with Black people, sometimes it has to be looked at as it's a progression. That first of all was to kind of get out of that bondage. And now it's about building up and trying to understand some of the challenges that we have mentally, why we behave the way that we behave. Because a lot of the stuff that he's touched on about that kind of exceptional Black man being put in that position, and then everyone's kind of thinking, okay, in order for me to move on, I kind of almost need to replace that person. It's very interesting concept, and I think it's some of the stuff that we've kind of shared on here before anyway. So yeah, it is interesting. I just think that you might have to decouple the statement from what he's actually saying for it to actually make some sense.
Well, for me to tap into that is the statement. I do get his point of what he's trying to, how he's trying to address his situation. But this is the whole scene of this is based on his experience for him to able to want to talk about this. So for him to just generalize in Black, I think that is not a good point. He can talk about South African within South African itself, as exactly what Cam was touching to. So I'll give you an example. I'm just going to go surface on this quickly because there's more I need to go into. You look at there's a series in Netflix called Unorthodox, and this series is about Jewish series. So if anyone on this platform has watched this series in Netflix, they will understand exactly what this guy is trying to say, because it's the same kind of level, the same body. But prior to that is that when also I've got a close friend. Her name is Marima Kamara. She has done exactly the same similarity of what this guy has done, but for Sierra Leone. But what she did was so totally different. She didn't see it as the question is Black people are not ready for freedom. She see it as a privilege and as an opportunity to go in. But she took her own approach differently. So the reason why she did that, at the end of it now, it has made her successful. But I will tap into that further on to the conversation. But for me, in general of this, I question myself is, what does it mean by ready? You know, that alone, what does it mean by ready? That alone is another question that need to be tap into. And the freedom, is it freedom by the slavery or is it freedom as a human being? So in that, I'm going to open it and then leave it there for now. But yeah, I think Kojo and Cam, they have kind of surfaced, understand the situation, what he's trying to say, because I am against what he's saying. And maybe I might change my mind at the end, but yeah, for now.
Yeah, thanks guys. So yeah, how I see it is I don't really want to try and repeat what the other guys have said. So yeah, in the statement itself, I feel that there are two words which are quite ambiguous. It could mean a lot of things to different people. And as Ali mentioned, the word ready, and Kojo mentioned the word freedom. So in terms of the word ready, as I understand it, it's when you're in a suitable state of action. So this is to be fully or properly prepared. And then freedom, as I understand it, is the power or the right to act, speak, and think without hindrance or restraint. And I think all those things need to be in the same place in order for that statement to be correct. But then the other thing is that the context that he gives, most of it is all true. His stories of sabotage and our mental well-being and our thinking are all true. So I think this is an example of like the straw man tactic, where you're saying something true, but then your actual premise is completely different. And so I think the stories that he gives are true, but it doesn't actually demonstrate readiness for being free. And that's where his statement, I would say, is wrong, or he hasn't fully supported the statement with the stories that he's given. And so many other aspects come into it in terms of freedom itself. I'm sure, as everyone would know, each time we've been given freedom, we've never really been given full freedom. It's always partial freedom. So there's other struggles and fight in those situations as to why the argument of readiness wouldn't really support it in that sense. So yeah, that's just me briefly, kind of nutshell, giving my views on it. I reckon the statement in itself is a triggering one. It definitely gets everyone's attention. I don't feel he's fully supported the statement with the context that he gives. As much as it being true, it doesn't really necessarily support the statement. But I'm excited to hear what you lot think. So if there is anyone in the audience that wants to give their thoughts, or maybe one of us guys can basically elaborate a bit more in terms of the thinking where we were going. I don't know, Coach, have you got any comments in so far, or anyone that wants to come first?
I think it's heating up. Jide did mention something, but I'm not sure if he wants to kind of join in at this point. But I think just to add quickly on some of the stuff that has been said, you have to, and I think sometimes you have to deep it in, and maybe from his perspective, it was just more to generate that kind of conversation in the first place by putting some sort of headline that kind of draws people in. Because it's very difficult as a Black person to see that and not really watch what he's saying, just to understand the context of the kind of message that he's trying to get across. Jide, do you want to come in at this point?
Yeah, I just think it's a profoundly stupid thing to say. You get a lot of people, regardless of race, who fancy themselves intellectuals, and they come out with this, provocative takes. And that's what we've just witnessed. I mean, everything, even notwithstanding the truth of many of the statements he's made and the context he's given, they don't lead to that conclusion that Black people weren't ready for the freedoms, even if he is just talking about South African Black people specifically. Freedom is the default of humanity. You should be born free. So the idea that Black people weren't ready for freedom, first of all, just fails on that strand. And second of all, he seems to be coming at this from some sort of commercial, business-oriented perspective, because he's had to face competition from maybe some Black people in the past, and they haven't totally supported him in his commercial ventures. Therefore, he's extrapolated this view that we're standing in each other. We're just, I guess, a little healthy competition in the business world has led him to this view that, Black people aren't ready for freedom. So, I mean, there's more to be said on it, but I think the stronger point for me is the freedom being the default of humanity. You should be born free. It was a great sin against humanity what happened to a lot of the African slaves who were victims of the transatlantic slave trade. And I think that's one crime against humanity that still hasn't been properly compensated for by reparations for African Americans. But that's another topic. One final point is I was going to make as he hasn't considered the counterfactual. So if Black people weren't ready for freedom, let's take Black South Africans, they weren't ready for freedom, then the counterfactual is they should have remained under apartheid until they were ready for freedom. So when will Black people be ready for freedom? And how can they ever be ready for freedom if they're under bondage? So it's something he didn't consider before making this point. Again, he was just trying to sound deep for his audience, and they must say, oh, that's very controversial. But you know what? It must be true because it's controversial. So it's one of these things you see a lot out there. You see people like Terry Crews also make that stupid point about Black liberation without white people is Black supremacy. So you get a lot of Black people coming out with these takes that just, once you give them 2 seconds of thought, they fall apart like a house of cards. And yeah, that's all I had to say for now.
Let me add to what Jide just mentioned as well. Jide, thanks for elaborating to that, because I brought up a lady called Marima Kamara, right? She had the same similarity agenda of what this guy, what we're talking about this topic. So exactly what Jide said, it's all about commercial purpose. So Marima Kamara has a business called Smiling Through Lights. She initially wanted to help out African, especially in Sierra Leone, West African, whereby I'm sure we all know lights in Africa is really an issue. If he wanted to tackle the situation, he's using a word that Black people were not ready for freedom, or are they ready for freedom? He should come up with his project, not to enforce his project, but to allow the community to understand what he wants, right? So once he can bring it down into the table and say, guys, this is what I'm going to bring, this is what I'm going to introduce, what I'll need to understand what the community need, and so on, then he can allow his projects to fulfilled and neutral. But the fact that he came as a bully, that's the word I will use, he came as a bully, just trying to bully them because of he's got the money, is not going to be successful. So that's why I wanted to say, Julia, thanks for bringing that up, because exactly what you said is just about commercial purpose and its own profit. Yeah.
You know what, let me come in on that. And I'll say, so this guy, his name is Vusi Thembekwayo. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Vici Tembekwayo. And he actually does a lot of good work in South Africa from a lot of what I've read about him and I've followed from him. I feel genuinely that a lot of what he does is genuine in terms of the community of South Africa. And you guys have mentioned the whole business aspect, and I feel you've kind of misunderstood him in the sense whereby, yes, he talks of stories of sabotage, business, but he has to give some kind of context, some kind of example. For him, the examples he's chosen to give are business ones. But the main premise of all his examples he's talking about is mindset. And it's mindset of the people in terms of the whole, he mentions the whole crabs in a bucket, how we try to pull each other down. And I really like that he even gives context in terms of, it's not our fault. He's just not made the statement and said it's Black people's fault. He's also talked about how white people have intentionally made us this way in terms of only allowing one person at a time and all those kind of things. So he, in all that he's saying, it is true. The problem is, in terms of in relation to the statement, is that the statement in itself is what I would say an oxymoron. You can't be ready for freedom. Like it's just impossible. And then the alternative, as Jide was saying, is what, they shouldn't be free, so they should be oppressed. It just never really justifies or works. I feel he just made a trigger statement to kind of highlight more to our community's mindset. And in terms of, until we fight the mental freedom, as in we're now, we've been controlled and oppressed for 400 years. In that breakdown of oppressing us for 400 years, they've affected the way we think, speak, and act. And in all those things, in order for us to be mentally free, we can then tackle the physical freedom. So I find in that sense, I do get what you're saying, but you're kind of missing where he was going from in terms of when he was talking about context. And then obviously it doesn't really relate to the statement itself, which I do agree in terms of everybody in that sense.
Let me respond to that quickly. I do understand the fact about what he's saying, but what you're not understanding is when he's addressing that situation, right? When you're going, first of all, understand this: Black we have come from a slavery, which you've mentioned, about 400 years, till now is 60 years, right? So if you calculate from 400 years to 60 years, that is nothing. We are still learning. We're still learning to know ourselves as a human race, as Black. So, and second of all, remember what is happening, knowing now what is happening in South Africa is an issue with Black and white, right? So those two things alone, that is a problem. And then and third of all, I do understand what he's saying, right? Whether or not on the situation, the problem is when you're going to a village, especially in Africa, you need to understand their culture. You do not come in and expect to bring your project and expect to allow that project to go through. You need to understand what the culture is. You need to understand what the chief is about. You need to understand what the mayor is about. You need to understand what the community is about, right? Once you understand that, then you are ready within your own self as a person to go in that village. I can't come from the Western world right now. I want to go and do a project and expect it to go to my country in the village. The second biggest is probably Bo. Go there and then go to them and say, no, I want to go and open this village, do this project. I cannot. I need to understand them first. I need to be ready to understand them. Then I can able to implement that idea that I wanted. That's where he went wrong. I do not disagree with what he's saying. The fact that we're still 60 years from even to say that we are free from slavery, that alone is an issue.
Yeah, I find it interesting that the lesson he took from his experiences in business, the sabotage and everything. I don't really know much about him, but it sounds like, how come he didn't conclude that he wasn't ready for business as opposed to Black people weren't ready for freedom? I mean, that's a much more simple explanation, but I mean, it seems like he's just not willing to take responsibility for his own failures. So he'd rather just, expand it and blame the Black people.
Okay, so yeah, I think I just wanted to come in here. I've got Habib coming in after, but just some points that I just wanted to make from the conversations that's been had. Just that last point you did, and it's an interesting one, right? Because it's almost like you're saying that agenda or is shifting that kind of blame of himself as a business person, how he was not able to overcome that. But I think fundamentally, just listening to a lot of the stuff that he's saying, there are some key things that he's kind of mentioned that I do agree with. And I think really and as I said, the statement is not necessarily something I personally agree with, but listening to the context that he gave and just that example. And I think really for my kind of take from it, it's almost like, I'm not sure if everyone's read that kind of 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And I think the key one, he says you start with the end in mind, right? And I guess, and trust me here, I'm not trying to say any blasé kind of statement because I've never been in these kind of positions that our ancestors have been in. So it's easy for me to talk about this from this respect, where it's almost like, I guess what he was trying to say is that whilst in captivity, whilst in kind of bondage, whilst you had this Jim Crow and apartheid stuff going on, you have to think that once you have that freedom, what do you do with that freedom? So he was thinking about maybe long-term kind of planning, where you're thinking ahead to say, okay, once I get to this next step, what is the next step for me, right? And I guess he was associating that with the kind of mentality where obviously if you were thinking about that initial freedom and you do get it, sometimes you could be a bit lapsed regarding what the next steps are or how you've been conditioned. And I guess for me, that's kind of what I was taking from that even now where we are having these conversations, and BLM and all these kind of stuff. And it's almost like, what is it that we want? What is the next step that we want to take? And it's almost like thinking a couple of years ahead to say, what does good look like? Setting expectations for ourselves so that we know when we're progressing, because the problems that we have sometimes, we have come so far and there's been so much that we have done as Black people, but a lot of the times the rhetoric that we have for ourselves is very negative. And I feel like sometimes that is the case because we're not able to kind of measure how far we've come as people. So I guess that's just the little part that I'd like to add before I let Habib come in. Habib, are you still there? Have we lost you?
Yeah, I'm here, Coach. Yeah, thanks for that. And just listening over everyone's shared perspective so far, I have to say I totally agree. Because it sounds like the sentiment that I'm getting is that as a whole, the statement "Black people are not ready for freedom" is one that we perhaps, I think, if I could say, we all disagree with. Myself personally, I think it's a lot simpler than that. As a public speaker, in his position, I think you have to at times find impactful ways of delivering a message, and I think it was simply a tactic to start off the conversation with an impactful statement and elaborate, albeit on a very valid topic or topics, in the sense of going to deliver business or some type of progression for an area of Africa that doesn't have that or that could benefit from that, and being sabotaged. These are all valid topics. And to Kojo's point just now, I think it's really important for public speakers or people in public in the public eye to be very mindful of how they of the things that they say. I think they have a responsibility to be very mindful of the things that they say and how that comes across, because we're all here now talking about this one particular statement: Black people aren't ready for freedom. For me, I personally, I don't think he believes that himself, if I'm completely honest. I think it was purely just a statement to deliver impact. Could he have gone about it a different way? Absolutely. There's so many other ways he could have got that same message across, but it's not the first time that public speakers will say things out of tone or out of context, just to get that to capture that attention. And in terms of that statement, I think that's all he was trying to do. Now, moving on to the elements of what he went on to elaborate and talk about in terms of being sabotaged as a business, I think it was Ali earlier, or it may have been Gino who mentioned that talked about understanding the sort of the lay of the land. I think it might have been Ali. And you talked earlier about understanding the lay of the land and actually taking the time to understand how things work. I think you mean from a cultural aspect, and understanding perhaps the needs of the people before delivering a project that will benefit them. For me, just to that point, if I could give a response to that, I'll have to say I disagree with that, because if, for example, he went there to deliver a water project to a part of Africa that didn't have a suitable water system, I don't think you need to seek permission from the chiefs. It's doing something to help the people, and if it's something that's going to benefit them in a long run, then you shouldn't have to wade through, red tape and levels of sort of political, little nuances just to do something good. I agree. I think he had good intentions from the sounds of what he was trying to achieve and what he was trying to do. I think he was trying to deliver a good thing, and the sort of the political issues and the cultural issues and these things. And by the way, this isn't something that's unique to Africa. It happens all over the world. It just takes shape in a different form, or and we see it happen in a different way. But this is something fundamentally that, just as a people across the world, we shouldn't have to continue to do. It's a problem, and it's a problem. It's a bigger problem that perhaps we may need to address on a different topic. But yeah, he was trying to do something good, but he was sabotaged, and he wanted to share that story and perhaps lessons learned. In terms of the statement, I don't even think he believes it himself.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Habib, and I definitely agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think a lot of the time what you have to remember is this isn't some white savior coming to South Africa to help the community. This is a fellow member of the current community trying to develop ways to improve and increase and improve the well-being of everywhere. And what you find is his story was more of sabotage, in terms of he, with his fellow peers in his community, is trying to improve things, but instead of everybody else at least maybe helping or joining in, they're actually trying to stop it completely, sabotage it, because it doesn't suit their personal interests. And that's more what he was talking about. He is from that same community. He grew up there. He speaks the language. He knows everything. He's not a random person coming and like, oh yeah, I want to do this and help everybody and blah, blah, blah. No, he's a fellow member of the community, trying to help the community grow. He was doing lots of things like education-wise, giving people access to degrees and working and stuff like that. The hub was a very, 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 very good idea. And what he's talking about is, in terms of as a community, what we find is he's talking about each other, us helping each other, is that we look down on each other and we're not trying to support each other in that sense. So definitely, I mean, moving away from the statement, as we all agree, the statement is basically wrong or doesn't make sense, or was maybe used as a trigger. I don't know if this is something you guys want to talk more about, the context of what he was actually saying. I personally just think everything he said was true. There wasn't really much to add on to it in that aspect. But I do want to give people a chance to say something before we close up and finish.
Yeah, on the point about, you said pretty much everything he said was true about the sabotage. He was trying to help people. But the interesting thing is, none of those things, the fact that you have in-group sabotage or saboteurs, and you have people within groups working against the interests of the wider group or working against people who would otherwise help that group. It's not unique to Black people or Black South Africans or Africans. It happens everywhere. It happens in Europe. It happens in America. It happens within Native American communities. Right now, there's something going on in Canada with the Wet'suwet'en tribes. And there's some infighting about getting some pipes built through their land that might make their lives better or worse. They're arguing over that. So it's not, there's sometimes as a community, we tend to think certain things are endemic to us. Like we'll say, oh, that's why, I often hear Black people say, that's why Black people just like getting in each other's ways. I think it's more a trait of humans than Black people. So these acts of whatever sabotage he experienced whilst trying to do this altruistic, taking this altruistic actions, it's not something which you should be used to indict Black people. It's a consequence of being humans. You will encounter humans who work against your interest for their own interest. That's just how it is. So again, I think his experiences shouldn't have led him to that conclusion.
You know what, Jude? I must say, and I'll say this loud, this is the first time that we could actually fully agree on something for once. I totally agree with the last comments that you just made. Oh, wow, yeah. And I think we have to be very careful that these kind of rhetorics, it does more damage to us as people than benefit, because and I think that's something I kind of touched on. He said we have to be able to kind of decouple this. It's a Black thing and it's a human thing, and it's very, very, very important. So I do totally agree with the comment that you just made, because it has happened everywhere. We've seen politics in the UK. We see red tapes, whether you work in schools, whether you work in government, just in even in corporate. A lot of the times even getting some, I guess I'm moving off the point a bit, but, these are challenges that we see everywhere. So it's not something that is just like an African or a Black kind of challenge. It just happens everywhere. So that's a great comment. I think I was just going to touch the whole kind of crabs in the bucket quickly, but, and I guess I've been reading a book by Tom Barrow called Brainwash. And in this book, he talks about this kind of idea of exceptionalism, where it's almost like we are seen as in kind of like a sea of failure, where it's like Black people fail, Black people are this. So once you get that one person that is at that top, and I think just going back to some of the stuff that he was kind of describing, he's almost seen as exception to the rule. And it's almost like, and this idea, and I'm not sure whether everyone kind of thinks that or everyone kind of shares that kind of ideology, where it's that Black person that's at the top. And it's the first time I've heard someone kind of actually put it in that way, where it's more like this whole kind of envy stuff that people talk about. And I guess I'm going back to some of the stuff that Jide has said already, right? But I would say anyway, which is to say some of the rhetorics that we share out there to say, you know, Black people don't kind of support each other and we're envious of each other. And he kind of put in that whole kind of using historical kind of stuff to back it up to say that we have been taught that way, of this whole exceptionalism, that it's just one person that could fulfill a certain role. And it's when we see that one person kind of fulfill that role, then everyone's kind of thinking, oh, this is my chance, I've missed my chance. And we're kind of almost waiting for that one person to, you know, take them off their perch in order for us to fulfill that role. And I'm not too sure what you guys kind of think of that, if we want to kind of elaborate a bit more on the content of the message that he kind of shared with us.
What I wanted to add into that is that to say, anyone that wants to do a project, whether it's a community, whether it's anything else within the town or city, is always for their interest. So let's bear that in mind. Whether it's like what we spoke about our topic last week about is it right for a Black person to stand for racism or to talk about racism? And some certain people put in a perfect example is not every Black person has the privilege or has the right to talk about racism towards anyone. I know I'm getting off topic here, but what I'm coming back into it is just to say, it's not every Black person that from that community will want the best interest within our community, if that makes sense. So whether or not I'm from South London and I want to come in South London and create a project, but back behind me, I know the projects that I want to do is for my own interest, whether it's free, whether or anything it is, but I know my agenda behind it. And within that agenda behind it, I want to multiply to do other thing else. So we need to get that in context in that kind of area. And another thing is that as what Jide mentioned, every part of the world, red line or anything, even perfect example where I live, they want to demolish most of the projects. I mean, most of the houses, the old houses, and they want to enforce their own new projects, right? But before they do that, they need to come to the community. They need to understand the community. They need to understand the mayor. They need to understand what the community need. Whether or not it's not the community might not need it, and they feel like, okay, come in anyway and still do it. That's not the point. They need to understand and they need to talk to the community. They need to understand that, okay, is it environmental good? Is it environmental friendly for the community? How is it going to embed the community? Is it going to bring more jobs in this community? Is it going to allow the function for the community to work properly? So all them kind of stuff. That's what I mentioned a company called Smiling Through Light, because she did it cleverly. She went to the village, understood what they wanted to do, talked to them chief or the mayor or any person and the community, and then it actually worked. Whether or not it's a statement that he wants to make sure that his community want to do good or he speak the language or anything, that's not the point. All of us has our own interest. Whether you go to work, you have your interest of your interest of going to work, end of the day and coming back to work, coming back home. Whether or not you also you want to do a project within a small project or anything, that you still know you have your agenda and your interest of what you need to know or what you want to do. You understand? That's what I'm trying to get. I'm not disputing what you're saying. Yes, in blacks community, which is a very a broad subjects to talk about, just black, because Asian does it, Indian people do it, Jewish people do it, white people do it. It shouldn't deliberately just pointing out at black, because we are waking up. And I've mentioned again, we've come out of 60 years of independence. So 60 years of independence of 450 years of slavery. That alone, we need to explain that, because we still have that mental issue. We still have that physical understanding and emotional impacting us. So we're still developing within ourselves. We're still there, we're still growing. It's just very hard, to break it through.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Ali. And I get what you're saying. I think he could probably, I agree with everything that you guys have said, but I think he could probably use the counter argument of, how when you say Black Lives Matter and then someone responds with All Lives Matter, he's talking about it affecting black people. He's not disputing whether other races or other types of people suffer from the same sabotage within their own communities, but he's more talking about how it's affected black people and why he gives the example of the intention from white people to black people, and how they made us think those kind of ways even more. So the problem is there, and they've exacerbated it and made it even worse amongst our community. And so in his thing is he's talking more about how black people are affected by the sabotage, but he is not disputing whether any other community has it. But I think it's really, really great what everyone said. I really don't want the conversation to drag on too much, so I'm probably looking to end the conversation now. I really appreciate everybody's input that they've put in so far. This is the LDN Perspective. If you really do like what we said, we're going to release the YouTube video, and it's also available on Spotify and other podcast platforms. Do make your comments and share. Thank you for everybody that has joined in. Thank you to my co-hosts. And thank you very much, everybody.
Perspectives, different views, one voice.